A wounded female veteran walked into a crowded Maine shelter carrying nothing but a box of old blankets and a heart she had kept locked for years. She was not looking for a dog, but at the very end of the cold kennel row, she stopped in front of an old female Labrador mix no one wanted. Gray around the muzzle, trembling on flat, aching paws, and scheduled to be put down within days. The dog did not bark. She did not beg. She only lifted her tired eyes and moved her tail once. That tiny movement changed everything, because the woman had survived war, grief, and years of silence, and the dog had survived cages, abandonment, and a lifetime of being used, then thrown away. But when these two broken souls met, something no one expected began to happen. What happened next shocked the shelter, changed a troubled boy's life, and proved that sometimes love arrives late, only because it was waiting for the right door to open. If this story touches your heart today, please consider sharing it with someone you care about, and if you enjoy stories about loyalty, hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Every subscription helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the good still left in this world. On a cold June morning in Bar Harbor, Maine, sea fog rolled in from Frenchman Bay and softened the little coastal town beneath a pale silver veil. Eleanor Whittaker had always thought the ocean sounded different after a person had lost someone. To tourists, it sounded peaceful. To children, it sounded like adventure. To Ellie, it sounded like a thing that remembered every goodbye ever spoken along the shore. She was 67 years old, a retired Army veteran who had served far from home decades earlier, and she lived alone in a small weathered house near the water. People in town knew her as polite, steady, and difficult to surprise. They did not know that she still woke before dawn some mornings with her heart racing, listening for sounds that were no longer there. They did not know that grief had made her house too quiet, or that silence could sometimes be louder than a storm. That morning, Ellie drove to the Harbor Haven Animal Rescue with a cardboard box on the passenger seat. Inside were 4 old blankets, folded with the careful hands of someone who had almost changed her mind 3 times. They had belonged to her late husband, Thomas. 1 was blue wool, 1 was brown fleece, and 2 were soft cotton throws he had kept in his old reading chair. Ellie had told herself the same sentence all morning. They are only blankets. Someone else can use them now. But when she carried the box through the shelter doors, the familiar ache returned. Giving away Thomas's things felt simple in theory, but nothing about love was simple once the person was gone. Love left behind objects that looked harmless until a hand touched them. The front room smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, and old coffee. Somewhere down the hall, dogs barked in uneven waves. Some sounded excited, some sounded frightened. One had the sharp little bark of a creature certain that joy was about to arrive. Ellie paused just inside the door, tightening her grip on the box. A woman at the reception counter looked up and smiled. She was Clara Bennett, 73 years old, a retired elementary school librarian who now volunteered at the rescue 5 days a week. Clara had silver hair pinned back with a pencil, kind eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested she had spent much of her life telling both children and dogs that running indoors was not a wise idea. "Well, bless you," Clara said, coming around the counter. "Those blankets will be loved before lunchtime." Ellie gave a small nod. They were sitting in a closet. Figured they should do some good. Clara's eyes softened, but she did not ask the question people often asked when they sensed a story behind an object. Ellie appreciated that. She had grown tired of explaining grief to people who only wanted the short version. "I can take them from here," Clara said. "I'll set them wherever you want." Clara led her through a side door and into the kennel wing. The barking grew louder, bouncing off the concrete walls. Young dogs leapt against the gates, tails whipping, paws clattering. A brown hound spun in circles as if life were a parade made especially for him. A young shepherd mix pressed a toy against the bars, offering it to anyone with 2 hands and a heartbeat. Ellie kept walking, eyes forward, telling herself she was only delivering blankets. She was not looking for a dog. That part mattered. Ellie had loved enough in her life to know the cost of it. She had loved Thomas, who had filled their house with bad jokes, strong coffee, and slow dancing in the kitchen. Then illness had taken him one careful piece at a time. Before Thomas, there had been friends in uniform whose names she still carried like stones in her coat pocket. After all of that, attachment felt less like a gift and more like a door she no longer trusted herself to open. At the far end of the row, the noise changed. The younger dogs barked and bounced behind her, but the last kennel was quiet. Ellie might have walked past if not for that silence. Inside, curled in the back corner, lay an old female dog. She was a Labrador Retriever mix around 11 years old, with a faded yellow coat and gray fur around her muzzle. Her body was heavy in the tired way of an animal that had stood too long, carried too much, and expected too little. She did not rise when Ellie stopped. She did not bark. She did not push her nose through the bars. She only opened her eyes. Those eyes were what held Ellie in place. They were not bright with pleading, and somehow that made them harder to bear. They were weary, watchful, and deep. They reminded Ellie of women she had seen in hospital waiting rooms, mothers who had already cried before anyone told them the official news. The dog looked at her with the quiet patience of a soul that had learned not to ask for more than the world was willing to give. Clara noticed Ellie had stopped. "That's Mabel," she said gently. Ellie looked down at the dog's name card. The letters were written in blue marker with a small heart drawn beside them. It should have looked cheerful. It did not. "How long has she been here?" Ellie asked. Clara was silent for a moment too long. "Almost 3 years." Ellie turned her head. 3 years?" Clara nodded. "She came in thin, scared, and half lame. We believe she was used for breeding for most of her life. Then when she got older and her body started failing, someone left her behind." Mabel shifted slightly at the sound of Clara's voice. The movement made her wince, though she tried to hide it in that brave, foolish way old dogs sometimes do. Ellie felt something tighten in her chest. "She has arthritis," Clara continued. "Bad teeth, some fear around loud noises. She needs patience, soft bedding, slow walks, and someone who understands she may never act like a puppy." A golden retriever puppy in the next row gave a happy yelp, as if arguing that acting like a puppy was a very fine thing. Clara gave a small laugh, but her eyes stayed on Mabel. "Most people want young dogs," Clara said. "Easy dogs. Pretty stories. They come in with children and say they want a best friend, but they don't usually mean one who limps." Ellie set the box of blankets on a nearby bench. Her hands felt empty now, and she did not like that. "I'm not here to adopt," she said, more quickly than she intended. Clara did not look surprised. "Most people aren't, at first." Ellie almost smiled. "That sounds like something written on a shelter brochure." "I may have written 1 or 2, Clara said. Then her humor faded. "But I will not pressure you. Mabel deserves more than pity. She deserves someone who sees her and stays." The words were simple, but they landed heavily. Someone who sees her and stays. Ellie had stayed through many things in life. She had stayed through duty, through hospital rooms, through hard winters, through the long, strange emptiness after Thomas's funeral when neighbors stopped bringing casseroles and the house became fully hers again. But staying with another living heart, one that might need her and then leave her, felt like walking toward an old fire. At that moment, Ellie's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from her daughter, Rachel, who lived in Portland and had been trying, with limited success, to manage her own tired life and her teenage son's growing anger. "Mom, Noah is on the bus. He should get there this afternoon. Please call me when he arrives." Ellie stared at the message. Noah Whitaker was 15 years old, her grandson. though lately he behaved as if family were an unfortunate legal arrangement. He had been suspended from school after a fight, and Rachel had decided a summer with Ellie might keep him away from worse trouble. Ellie loved the boy, but she did not know him anymore. The last time she saw him, he barely removed his headphones and answered questions with shrugs sharp enough to cut rope. In a few hours, her quiet house would hold another wounded creature. The thought came before she could stop it, and she looked back at Mabel. No, she told herself, do not turn this into a sign. Mabel remained in the corner, chin resting on her paws. Around her, the shelter carried on. Doors opened. Dogs barked. Clara lifted the blankets from the box and began sorting them, but Ellie stayed where she was. The old dog's breathing was slow. Her body looked uncomfortable, even at rest. "Does she ever get adopted for a trial?" Ellie asked. Clara folded the blue wool blanket against her chest. "No. She had one family look at her last spring. They changed their minds when they saw her walk." Ellie swallowed. "That seems cruel." "It was honest," Clara said. "Cruel is when people make promises they never mean to keep." Ellie had no answer for that. A young couple entered the kennel wing behind them, laughing softly as a volunteer led them toward the puppies. The woman paused near Mabel's kennel for half a second, then moved on. The man did not pause at all. Mabel watched them pass without lifting her head, as if she had long ago stopped spending hope on footsteps. Ellie felt suddenly foolish standing there in her stiff coat, pretending she had not been touched by a dog who had done nothing except survive. Clara walked closer and lowered her voice. "I should tell you something, Ellie." Ellie looked at her. "The shelter is overcrowded. We are trying everything we can, but senior dogs are hard. Mabel is safe today, but I do not know how long that will remain true." Ellie understood what Clara was not saying. The words did not need to be spoken in full. Some sentences arrived wearing a shadow, and this one did. "She's on the list," Ellie said quietly. Clara's face tightened with sadness. "Not officially this morning, but soon, if nothing changes." The barking around them seemed to fade. Ellie looked at Mabel and felt the past move inside her. Not as a memory exactly, but as a pressure. Too many beings left behind. Too many quiet corners. Too many final days no one wanted to name. She thought of Noah arriving with his anger packed tighter than his clothes. She thought of Thomas's blankets leaving her house. She thought of herself, standing in a shelter with no plan, no answer, and no desire to open her heart again. Mabel's eyes shifted toward her. Ellie stepped closer to the kennel door. Slowly, because sudden movement seemed unfair, she bent until her knees protested and her face was level with the bars. The old dog did not move away. She did not move forward either. Trust, Ellie knew, was sometimes only the absence of retreat. "Hello, old girl," Ellie whispered. For one long second, nothing happened. Then Mabel's tail moved. It did not wag in joy. It did not sweep the floor in bright circles. It simply lifted a little and tapped once against the concrete. One weak sound, one small answer. One tiny knock from behind a door Ellie had promised herself never to open again. Clara covered her mouth, but said nothing. Ellie stayed crouched there, looking into the kennel at the old dog nobody wanted, while the fog pressed against the shelter windows and the sea breathed somewhere beyond the town. She had not come to adopt. She had not come to be chosen. Yet something in that single tail tap followed her like a bell as she stood, picked up the empty cardboard box, and walked slowly back toward the front door. By afternoon, Noah would arrive with his headphones, his anger, and his own hidden ache. By evening, Ellie's house would be less quiet, but not less lonely. And at the end of a kennel row, Mabel would still be waiting, as if waiting had become the only prayer she had left. Ellie stepped out into the cold Maine fog and told herself she was going home. But even then, she knew some part of her had stayed behind. Ellie Whitaker drove home from Harbor Haven Animal Rescue with an empty cardboard box on the passenger seat and the strange feeling that she had forgotten something important. The fog had thickened over Bar Harbor, turning the road pale and soft around the edges, but her mind stayed sharp on one small sound, the weak tap of Mabel's tail against the kennel floor. It followed her past the fishing docks, past the closed breakfast cafe, past the old church with its white steeple fading into mist. By the time Ellie reached her house near the water, she had told herself at least 10 times that one lonely dog in one crowded shelter was not her responsibility. She was 67 years old. She had lived through war, widowhood, and enough hospital rooms to know that care always came with a bill, and not all bills were paid with money. Noah arrived that afternoon with one backpack, one duffel bag, and a silence large enough to fill the porch. He was Ellie's 15-year-old grandson, a high school student from Portland who had been sent to spend the summer with her after a fight at school. His mother, Rachel Whitaker, Ellie's 42-year-old daughter and a medical office manager, had called twice before the bus reached town, trying to sound hopeful and tired at the same time. Ellie had promised her that Noah would be safe. She had not promised that he would be happy because Ellie still respected the truth too much to dress it in a party hat. Noah stepped into the house with headphones over his ears and a face that seemed determined not to be impressed by anything. He gave Ellie a quick hug because his mother had clearly told him to, then carried his bags upstairs without asking which room was his. At dinner, he answered in half sentences. The fish chowder was fine. The room was fine. School was fine. Everything was fine in the way people say fine when they mean nothing is. Ellie did not push. She knew the look of someone guarding a wound. She had worn that look herself for years. That night, the house settled into its old wooden noises. Wind moved against the windows. The sea breathed beyond the dark. Noah stayed upstairs, the thin thump of music leaking through the ceiling now and then. Ellie sat in Thomas's old chair, though the blue wool blanket that had once hung over its arm was gone. She tried to read, but the same paragraph kept passing beneath her eyes without entering her mind. In every pause between the wind and the house creaking, she imagined claws shifting on concrete. She saw Mabel curled at the back of the kennel, not asking, not begging, just waiting as if waiting had become the shape of her life. Ellie closed the book. "No," she said softly to the empty room. "I cannot." But the room, being old and honest, did not argue. It only held the silence around her. The phone rang the next morning before breakfast. Ellie was in the kitchen pouring coffee when Clara Bennett's name appeared on the screen. Clara was the 73-year-old volunteer from the rescue, a retired librarian with a gentle voice and the moral strength of someone who could make a whole room behave by clearing her throat. Ellie answered with the uneasy feeling of a woman who already knew the news would not be light. "Ellie," Clara said, "I'm sorry to call so early." Ellie set the coffee pot down. "It is all right." There was a pause on the line, and in that pause Ellie heard the shelter again. The barking, the disinfectant smell, the loneliness at the end of the row. "It is Mabel," Clara said. Her voice stayed controlled, but only barely. "The shelter had its review meeting this morning. She has been placed on the euthanasia list for the end of the week if no adopter or foster steps forward." Ellie's hand tightened around the phone. For a moment, she felt anger rise fast and hot, but it had nowhere clean to land. Clara had not made the rule. The shelter workers had not created the overcrowding. Even the people who walked past Mabel were not monsters. They were simply people choosing easier love, cheaper love, younger love. Ellie understood that, and understanding made it worse. "She has 3 days?" Ellie asked. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "I fought for more time. I did. But we are full, and the senior dogs are always the first ones no one sees." Ellie turned toward the window. The morning outside was gray, with gulls cutting across the sky like torn paper. "Clara, I am too old to take on an old dog." "I know. She has arthritis, teeth problems, fear issues, vet bills. I know. And I cannot take one more goodbye." The words came out before Ellie could soften them. On the other end, Clara said nothing for a moment. Then she answered with painful gentleness. "I know that too." The quiet after that was worse than persuasion would have been. Ellie wanted Clara to argue so she could argue back. She wanted someone to tell her she was being selfish so she could defend herself with age, money, grief, and common sense. Instead, Clara simply gave her the truth and left it in her hands. "I am not asking you to save the world," Clara said. "I just thought you should know." Ellie thanked her, ended the call, and stood in the kitchen with the phone still in her hand. She did not realize Noah had come downstairs until he spoke from the doorway. "That the dog from yesterday?" Ellie turned. Noah stood there in a dark hoodie, hair uncombed, headphones hanging around his neck. He tried to look bored, but his eyes were awake. "Yes," Ellie said. "Her name is Mabel." "She is going to die?" Ellie looked at him sharply, not because the question was cruel, but because it was too direct for the morning air. "If no one takes her, yes." Noah shrugged, but it was not a careless movement. It was a shield. "Then taking her home just means you get attached and then feel worse later." Ellie stared at him. She should have corrected him. She should have said something wise about compassion, about mercy, about doing the right thing even when it hurts, but the problem was that Noah had spoken the exact sentence Ellie had been carrying inside herself. He had simply said it without the older language people use to make fear sound practical. "You think that is smart?" she asked. "I think it is honest." Ellie took a breath. "Sometimes honest is only fear wearing a clean shirt." Noah looked away first. "Mom said I have to do community service while I am here. She said you need structure." "She said community service." Ellie almost smiled, but the morning was too heavy for it. "Then we will start at the shelter." His head snapped back. "You are serious?" "Yes. I do not even like dogs that much." "That may make you a fair judge of character," Ellie said, and for the first time since he arrived, Noah looked as if he might laugh. He did not, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. By noon, Ellie had driven him to Harbor Haven. Noah walked beside her with the wounded dignity of a young man sentenced to soap and buckets. Clara greeted him kindly and introduced herself without making too much of his mood. She handed him gloves, a scrub brush, and a list of tasks. When Noah asked where to start, Clara pointed down the kennel row. "Mabel's space needs fresh bedding," she said. "Move slowly. She startles." Noah looked toward the end of the row. "That is the dog?" "That is Mabel." He walked to her kennel with the awkward caution of someone who did not want to care and was afraid he already might. Mabel lifted her eyes but did not rise. Noah opened the gate only after Clara showed him how. He cleaned in silence, pushing old bedding aside, wiping the floor, pretending not to notice when Mabel watched him from the corner. She did not bark. She did not growl. She did not demand anything from him. That seemed to confuse Noah more than excitement would have. When he finished, Clara gave him one of Thomas's donated cotton blankets. Noah spread it on the floor, uneven at first, then smoothed the corners with surprising care. Mabel sniffed it, stepped onto it slowly, and lowered herself with a tired sigh. Noah sat outside the kennel door, back against the wall. "You do not ask many questions," he said to her. Mabel blinked. Lucky. Ellie watched from the far end of the row, unseen by him. Something inside her softened and ached at the same time. Noah did not need a lecture. He needed a quiet place where sorrow did not have to explain itself. Somehow, an old dog with aching paws had given him that before Ellie had known how. The next 2 days passed with the weight of a clock in every room. Ellie slept badly. Noah asked once if they were going back to the shelter, and when Ellie said yes, he only nodded. Each visit, he cleaned Mabel's kennel, changed her water, and sat near her for a few minutes longer. He still said he did not want a dog. Ellie did not challenge him. She was busy telling herself the same lie. On the final morning, rain came hard from the sea, cold and slanting. Ellie stood in the hallway with her coat on for nearly 5 minutes before picking up her keys. Noah appeared at the stairs. "Are you going?" he asked. Ellie looked at him. "Yes." "To get her?" She did not answer right away. Then she said, "To see her." Noah nodded, but his voice was softer when he spoke. "That is not the same thing." "No," Ellie said, "it is not." At Harbor Haven, rain streaked the front windows and turned the parking lot dark. Clara was behind the counter holding a folder she had clearly hoped to need. Ellie stepped inside, removed her wet hood, and looked toward the kennel door. She could not see Mabel from there, but she felt the old dog's presence like a question waiting at the end of a hallway. Clara stood very still. Ellie reached for the adoption papers with hands that did not feel steady. "I do not know if I can save her," she said, her voice low but clear. "I do not know if I am strong enough to do this well." Clara's eyes filled, though she smiled. Ellie signed the first page, then the second. Then she looked up and finished the only promise she trusted herself to make. "But I know I do not want her to die alone." Mabel came home wrapped in Thomas's old blue blanket, the same one Ellie had almost given away before something in the shelter had pulled it back into her life. Clara Bennett, the 73-year-old rescue volunteer who had spent years helping unwanted animals find homes, carried Mabel out to Ellie's car with careful hands, as if the old dog were not heavy but sacred. Noah stood by the open back door trying to look bored, though he had already folded the blanket twice to make the seat softer. Ellie noticed, but did not mention it. At 15, Noah still believed kindness was safer when no one named it. The ride home was quiet. Mabel lay on the back seat with her gray muzzle resting on the blanket, her eyes half open, watching the passing fog through the window. She did not whine or bark. She only breathed in slow, uncertain pulls, as if every mile away from the shelter needed to be tested before she trusted it. Noah sat beside her with his headphones around his neck instead of over his ears. Once, when the car turned too sharply, Mabel's old body slid a little, and Noah put out one hand to steady her. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if embarrassed by his own tenderness. Ellie saw it in the rearview mirror and kept driving. The house near the water looked different when Ellie opened the front door with Mabel beside her. It was still the same small house with faded shutters, narrow stairs, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, but the air had changed. For years, the house had belonged mostly to memory. Now something alive stood at the threshold, trembling on aching legs, unsure whether she was allowed to enter. "It is all right," Ellie said softly. "You can come in." Mabel placed one paw over the doorway, then stopped. The floorboards creaked beneath Ellie's boot, and the sound made the old dog flinch. Her ears lowered. Her body leaned back toward the porch. Noah came up behind them carrying the bag of food Clara had sent home. "Great," he said, though his voice had no real sharpness. "We adopted a dog who is afraid of floors." Ellie gave him a look. "I mean," he corrected, "a very reasonable dog with strong opinions about architecture." That almost made Ellie smile. Almost. It took 10 minutes, half a treat, and a great deal of patience before Mabel stepped fully into the house. Once inside, she stayed close to the wall, moving slowly from room to room with her nose low. The stairs frightened her most. She stared at them as if they were a mountain built by people with no mercy. Ellie did not force her. Instead, she made a bed for Mabel in the living room using the blue blanket and a thick cotton throw from the shelter. Noah added an old pillow without being asked. The first days were not the warm, easy beginning people like to imagine when they spoke about rescue dogs. Mabel did not understand toys. When Noah rolled a tennis ball gently across the floor, she stepped back and watched it stop near her paws like it might explode. When Ellie set down a metal food bowl too quickly, The small clang sent Mabel under the kitchen table, shaking so hard that the chair legs tapped against her side. The television frightened her too. One afternoon, an old movie played a scene with fireworks, and before Ellie could reach the remote, Mabel lowered herself to the floor and crawled behind the couch. Ellie turned the television off and sat beside the couch for a long time. "No more fireworks," she promised. Noah stood in the doorway holding the tennis ball. "She really thinks everything is dangerous." Ellie did not look at him. Some creatures learn that because too many things were. He said nothing after that. Ellie was not doing much better than Mabel, though she worked hard to hide it. At night, the unfamiliar sound of claws clicking across the floor pulled her from sleep again and again. Once, Mabel scratched gently at the living room door because she wanted to go outside, and Ellie woke with her heart pounding, one hand pressed against the bed as if she had to steady herself against a world tilting beneath her. For a few seconds, she did not see her room. She saw dust, heat, a long road in a country far away. She heard shouting that was not in the house, not in Maine, not in the present. Then Noah's footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Grandma?" he called. Ellie forced her breathing to slow. "I'm fine." It was a phrase both of them used too often to be believed. The next morning, Ellie stood in the kitchen with one hand gripping the back of a chair. Mabel had knocked a spoon off the counter with her tail, and the sharp sound against the floor had split the morning open. Ellie knew where she was. She knew the year, the town, the little kitchen, the window facing the gray water. Still, her body had gone somewhere else before her mind could stop it. Mabel, who had been the cause of the sound, did something unexpected. Instead of running away, she moved toward Ellie. Slowly, carefully, with her head low and her paws unsure, the old dog crossed the kitchen and pressed her gray muzzle against Ellie's knee. Ellie looked down. There was no demand in Mabel's touch, no panic, no question, just warmth, just the steady weight of another living being choosing to stay near her. Ellie lowered herself to the floor, not gracefully because age made every deep bend a negotiation. Mabel stepped closer and rested her head in Ellie's lap. For a long moment, Ellie did not move. She had heard speeches about healing. She had sat through meetings where people used careful words like trauma, recovery, adjustment, and resilience. Some of those words were useful. Some were kind. But none of them felt as powerful as an old dog's head resting on her knees in a quiet kitchen after a bad memory had tried to drag her away. Noah found them there. He stopped at the doorway, saw Ellie on the floor with Mabel pressed against her, and immediately looked down as if he had walked into a private chapel. "You okay?" he asked. Ellie stroked Mabel's neck. "I am getting there." Noah nodded. He stepped into the kitchen, picked up the fallen spoon, and placed it gently in the sink. Later that afternoon, Noah tried again with the tennis ball. He sat several feet from Mabel in the living room, close enough to be present but far enough not to trap her. "Listen, four-legged grandma," he said, rolling the ball a few inches. "This is not a weapon. I checked." Mabel watched the ball with deep suspicion. Noah leaned closer and whispered, "Honestly, I respect that. Most things thrown by humans probably deserve suspicion." Ellie, sitting in Thomas's old chair with a cup of tea, hid her smile behind the rim. The joke was small, but small things mattered in a house that had gone too long without them. Noah rolled the ball again, slower this time. Mabel stretched her neck, sniffed it, and then looked at him as if asking why anyone would waste a perfectly good afternoon on such nonsense. "That counts," Noah said. "Progress." Through Mabel, Ellie and Noah began speaking in ways they could not manage directly. Ellie did not know how to ask him whether he missed his father, a man who had left after the divorce and become less present with every year. Noah did not know how to admit that anger was easier than missing someone who no longer called. But when Mabel refused to climb the stairs, they worked together to block them off safely. When Mabel shook at the sound of the dishwasher, Noah turned it on only after warning her, as if she were a person who deserved notice. When Ellie forgot to eat lunch, Noah made toast and claimed he had made too much by accident. The house did not become happy all at once. Wounds did not heal because a dog crossed a threshold. Mabel still hid beneath the table when delivery trucks rumbled by. Ellie still woke some nights with her breath caught in her throat. Noah still answered some questions with silence sharp enough to close a door. But now the silence had a heartbeat inside it. It had paws, a gray muzzle, and a blue blanket in the corner of the living room. Then, one night, the storm came. Rain struck the windows hard, and wind pushed against the house from the sea. Ellie had gone to bed early, exhausted by a day of pretending she was steadier than she felt. Near midnight, a dream took hold of her. In it, she was young again, far from Maine, running toward a voice she could not reach. The sky flashed. The ground shook. Someone called her name, but when she turned, there was only dust. She woke, gasping. For a moment, she could not move. Her hands clutched the blanket. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The room was dark except for the dull gray light from the storm outside. Down the hall, a floorboard creaked as Noah woke and came toward her room. But Mabel reached her first. The old dog pushed the bedroom door open with her nose and came in despite her fear of the hallway shadows. She climbed only halfway onto the rug before her weak legs trembled, but she kept going until she reached Ellie's side. Then she pressed her body against the bed, warm and solid and real. Ellie lowered one shaking hand. Mabel leaned into it. Noah appeared in the doorway, pale with worry. "Grandma?" Ellie could not answer at first. She slid carefully from the bed to the floor and put both arms around Mabel's neck. The old dog stood still, accepting the weight of her sorrow like she had been born for that single duty. Ellie cried then, not quietly enough to hide it and not loudly enough to frighten the house. She cried for Thomas, for the war, for the years she had survived by locking every door inside herself. She cried because Mabel had been thrown away and still came when someone needed comfort. She cried because Noah was watching, and for once she did not feel ashamed of being seen. Noah stepped into the room and sat on the floor a few feet away. He did not say anything. He only stayed. Outside, the storm moved over Bar Harbor, rattling the windows and bending the trees toward the sea. Inside, a wounded woman, a troubled boy, and an old unwanted dog sat together in the dark, not healed, not yet, but no longer alone. Winter came to Bar Harbor as if the sea itself had grown quiet and decided to listen. Snow covered the fences, the roofs, the narrow road that led down toward the water, and the small yard behind Ellie Whitaker's house. By morning, the world looked softer than it had any right to look, as if every hard edge had been forgiven during the night. Ellie stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, watching white flakes drift past the glass. She was 67 years old, a retired Army veteran who had spent years learning how to prepare for danger. Yet that morning she found herself worried about something as ordinary as cold paws. Mabel lay on Thomas's old blue blanket near the living room heater. The elderly Labrador mix was still stiff in the mornings, and her joints moved slowly until the house warmed around her. Her yellow coat had grown a little healthier since coming home, though her muzzle remained gray and her walk still carried the memory of long years on hard floors. Ellie had learned the small sounds Mabel made when standing up hurt. She had learned which steps were too high, which noises were too sudden, and how to place a hand beneath the old dog's chest without making her feel trapped. Noah came downstairs in thick socks and a hooded sweatshirt, his hair still carrying the wild architecture of sleep. He was 15, a high school student spending the summer and now winter break, with the grandmother he had once believed was impossible to understand. He stopped at the window, looked at the snow, and then looked at Mabel with the solemn expression of a man about to perform a medical procedure. "Patient may require protective gear," he announced. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Is that your professional opinion?" "Yes," Noah said, already reaching for the red scarf Clara Bennett had knitted for Mabel. Clara was the 73-year-old rescue volunteer who still called every few days to ask about Mabel, though she pretended she was only checking shelter paperwork. As her self-appointed veterinarian, I must insist. You have not finished biology. That is why I am self-appointed. Ellie did laugh then, softly but truly. Months earlier, Noah's humor had come wrapped in armor. Now it arrived with warmth. He knelt beside Mabel and carefully tied the red scarf around her neck, loose enough not to bother her, neat enough to satisfy whatever serious part of him had decided this mattered. Mabel accepted the attention with the patient dignity of an old queen being dressed for a public appearance. Noah stepped back and nodded. The patient is ready for the Arctic expedition. Ellie looked at Mabel's cloudy eyes, her stiff legs, and the snow gathering outside the back door. "We will only stay out a minute," she said. "If she seems cold, we bring her right back in." Mabel, who had been slow to understand toys, stairs, television sounds, and the strange customs of household life, seemed to understand the door. The moment Ellie reached for her leash, the old dog lifted her head. Her tail gave a careful sweep against the blanket. Not wild, not young, but hopeful. Hope, Ellie had learned, could be quiet and still change the temperature of a room. They stepped onto the back porch together. Cold air met them sharply, carrying the smell of pine, salt, and wood smoke. Mabel paused with her front paws at the edge of the porch. Below her, the yard was smooth and white, untouched except for the thin line where wind had brushed snow against the fence. Ellie braced herself for fear. She expected Mabel to pull back, to tremble, to decide the white ground was another strange human trick. Instead, Mabel lowered her head and sniffed. Her first paw touched the snow. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The old dog stood very still as if listening to a voice only she could hear beneath the frozen earth. Then she lifted that paw, stared at it, and sneezed. Noah made a sound that was half laugh, half gasp. "Mabel," he whispered. "What was that?" Mabel answered by taking another step. Then another. Then, with a sudden awkward bounce that nearly made Ellie drop the leash, she hopped forward into the yard. Snow puffed around her legs. Her red scarf shifted sideways. Her ears lifted. She turned in a crooked little circle, not fast, not graceful, not anything close to young, but full of such surprised delight that Ellie felt the sight go straight through her. Mabel ran. It was a small run, uneven and clumsy with pauses when her stiff legs remembered their age. But it was still a run. She pushed through the shallow snow with her nose low, then lifted her head and gave a soft, breathy sound that was almost a bark. Snow dusted her gray muzzle until she looked like an old queen who had stolen powdered sugar from a Christmas kitchen and refused to apologize. Noah pulled out his phone. "Oh my gosh, Grandma, look at her." "I am looking," Ellie said. But she was doing more than looking. She was witnessing something that felt almost private, almost holy. The dog who had once lain silent at the end of a kennel row was now circling the yard beneath falling snow. The body was old, but joy had made a lantern of it. Mabel's happiness did not erase what had happened to her. It did not repair every sore joint or every year of neglect. Yet for that moment, she was not a cast-off, not a shelter file, not a final warning on a list. She was simply alive. Ellie began to laugh. It surprised her. The sound came from somewhere deeper than politeness, deeper than manners, deeper than the careful little smile she gave neighbors at the grocery store. It rose up and broke free before she could manage it. Noah looked at her, and his phone slowly lowered. He watched Mabel, then Ellie, and then the phone slipped into his coat pocket. "You stopped recording," Ellie said. Noah kept his eyes on the yard. "Some things are better without a screen." Ellie did not answer. She only reached over and squeezed his shoulder. This time, he did not move away. A week later, Noah took Mabel's story to school. His English and civics teacher, Mrs. Angela Parker, was 39 years old, a community-minded educator who believed teenagers learned best when lessons touched real life. She had assigned the class a winter service project and asked each student to propose one idea that could help the town. Noah had planned to say as little as possible. Then he remembered Mabel standing in the snow with her crooked legs and red scarf, lit from within by a joy no one had expected. When his turn came, he stood at the front of the classroom and cleared his throat. A few students shifted in their seats. One boy near the window smirked before Noah even began. "I think we should help senior dogs get adopted," Noah said. The smirk became a laugh. Someone muttered that nobody wanted old dogs. Another student said puppies were easier. Noah's face tightened. Ellie, if she had been there, would have recognized the old storm building in him. It was the same storm that had gotten him in trouble before. For a second, his hands closed into fists at his sides. Then he stopped. He thought of Mabel watching him from the kennel, asking nothing. He thought of Ellie saying honest could be fear, wearing a clean shirt. So he took a breath and did something harder than anger. He spoke plainly. He told them about an old dog who had been left behind because she limped. He told them how she had been days away from being put down. He told them how she had been afraid of a tennis ball, a food bowl, and a television, but not too afraid to comfort a person who woke from nightmares. Then he told them about the snow. "Sometimes older animals do not need to be fixed," Noah said, his voice steadier now. "Sometimes they just need to be chosen again." The room changed after that. Not fully, not like magic, but enough. Mrs. Parker nodded slowly, and by the end of class, Noah had permission to organize a senior dog adoption day with Harbor Haven Animal Rescue. He would need posters, volunteers, and a short talk. The thought terrified him, which was how he knew it mattered. Ellie changed in quieter ways. She accepted an invitation she had ignored for years and went to a local veterans meeting at the Bar Harbor Community Hall. The meeting was led by Frank Dobbins, a 72-year-old retired Navy mechanic who now helped older veterans find companionship and support. He greeted Ellie without fuss, which helped. There were 6 people in the room, all carrying histories that did not need to be displayed to be real. Ellie did not say much. She sat near the door with Mabel lying at her feet, the red scarf folded neatly under the dog's collar. For Ellie, staying in that room was already a victory. Near the end of the meeting, someone shifted a stack of folding chairs against the wall. One chair slipped and hit the floor with a hard metallic crack. Ellie's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her breath locked. The room narrowed. She stood too quickly, one hand reaching for the back of her chair, her eyes searching for an exit she suddenly needed more than air. Mabel rose. The old dog moved slowly but with purpose. She leaned her warm body against Ellie's leg, pressing close enough to give Ellie something real to feel. Fur, weight, breath, present time, present room, Maine, snow outside, no danger here. Ellie looked down. Her hand found Mabel's head. The room waited without staring too hard. Frank Dobbins, kind enough to understand and wise enough to add lightness, gave Mabel a respectful nod. "That dog ought to be given a rank," he said. A small ripple of laughter moved through the room, gentle and grateful. Ellie drew one slow breath, then another. She looked at Mabel, still leaning against her like a small, stubborn miracle, and felt her fear loosen its grip. "She has been commanding me since day one," Ellie said. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning, while Ellie was brushing snow from the back steps and Mabel was supervising from the doorway with the serious patience of an elderly queen. Winter had settled over Bar Harbor in layers, white on the roofs, white along the fence rails, white across the path where Mabel now liked to leave her slow, crooked footprints. Noah was at the kitchen table, supposed to be working on posters for the senior dog adoption day, though half his attention was on convincing Mabel that a corner of toast counted as emotional support. Ellie's phone rang, and Clara Bennett's name appeared on the screen. Clara, the 73-year-old volunteer from Harbor Haven Animal Rescue, sounded different from the first word. There was no panic in her voice, but there was a careful excitement, the kind people use when they have found something fragile and are afraid to hold it too tightly. "Ellie," she said, "I think you should come by the shelter today. I found something about Mabel." Ellie looked toward the old dog who had lowered herself onto the kitchen rug and was watching Noah's toast with deep moral concern. "Is she all right?" "She is more than all right," Clara said softly. "I found a box of old intake records from before the shelter moved storage buildings. There are papers in it that should have been connected to Mabel years ago. Her first name was not Mabel." Ellie went still. Names had weight. Some were given with love. Some were given because a file needed filling. Some were lost when the world stopped caring enough to remember. "What was it?" Ellie asked. "Daisy May," Clara said. The kitchen seemed to grow quiet around those two words. Noah looked up from the table. Mabel did not react, but Ellie did. She could not explain why the name hurt. Maybe because it sounded too sweet for the life Mabel had survived. Maybe because it belonged to a porch, a garden, a woman calling from the back door in summer light. By noon, Ellie, Noah, and Mabel were at Harbor Haven. Clara met them in the small office behind the front counter. On the desk was a cardboard file box with bent corners and a smell of dust and old paper. Clara had placed a folder on top, along with a cracked brown collar. It was too worn to be useful, but not too worn to be meaningful. A small brass tag hung from it, scratched and dull, yet still readable if the light caught it correctly. Daisy May. Noah leaned closer. That was hers? Clara nodded. It came in with her paperwork, but the records were misfiled. The collar must have been separated when she arrived. "I'm sorry it took this long." Ellie touched the tag with one finger. The metal was cold. Clara opened the folder. She belonged to a woman named Rose Caldwell. Rose was 78 years old, a retired seamstress who lived in a small town in Vermont called Maple Ridge. From what I found, Daisy May was listed as her companion dog. Not service-trained, just deeply loved. Rose Caldwell had been dead for several years. After her passing, a relative had signed a transfer paper, but after that, the trail grew thin. The records suggested Daisy May had been moved between homes, then disappeared from any official note. Years later, she was found wandering in another county, older, frightened, and no longer carrying the name that had once meant home. Ellie listened without speaking. She looked at Mabel, who was resting beside Noah's chair, her gray muzzle on her paws. The thought that Mabel had once been Daisy May, once been called by a voice that loved her, did not make her suffering easier. It made it sharper. Neglect was painful enough when it began in cruelty, but to have known warmth first, to have had a porch and a person, then to lose it all and become unwanted, felt like a second kind of heartbreak. "She was loved," Ellie said. "Yes," Clara replied. "I believe she was." Noah sat back, quieter than usual. "Could we find the house?" Ellie turned to him. "Noah." "What?" he said. "If that was her home, maybe she should see it." "It is in Vermont. Roads are icy. She is old. I am old. You drove in worse weather to get me from the bus station when I forgot my coat. That was 15 minutes, and you complained for 20. Clara looked down at the folder, hiding a smile. Ellie should have refused. A sensible person would have taken the collar, thanked Clara, and gone home. But the tag sat on the desk like a tiny bell from another life. Daisy May. Rose Caldwell. A small town in Vermont. A story unfinished. That night, Ellie placed the old collar on the kitchen table. Noah sat across from her, pretending not to watch as she studied the map on her tablet. Mabel slept nearby on the blue blanket, unaware that the humans were trying to follow the path of her lost name. "This may not mean anything to her," Ellie said. Noah looked at the dog. "Maybe, but it might mean something to us." That was the sentence that changed her mind. 2 days later, they drove west through New England. 3 travelers in an old Subaru with a thermos of coffee, a bag of dog treats, and Noah's playlist turned down to a level Ellie called civilized. Snow lined the roads. Small towns passed by with church steeples, brick libraries, closed farm stands, and houses with smoke rising from chimneys. Mabel lay across the back seat, wrapped in Thomas's blue blanket, while Noah sat beside her and read the folder again, as if the papers might reveal more if handled with enough care. Ellie drove in silence for long stretches. The road gave her too much room to think. She thought of Thomas and the life they had built before illness narrowed it. She thought of herself, after he died, moving through the house like a shadow that paid bills. She thought of Mabel waiting for a woman named Rose who never returned. Grief had many languages, but waiting was one of its oldest. Maple Ridge, Vermont, was small enough that the gas station clerk knew the Caldwell name. He directed them to a narrow road near the edge of town, where an old white house sat behind a low stone wall. The paint was worn, the porch sagged a little, and the garden beds were sleeping beneath snow, but the place still held a kind of tenderness. It looked like a home that had once known someone's steady hands. An older man came out of the neighboring house when he saw them by the road. He was Henry Wilkes, 81 years old, a retired mail carrier who had lived next door to Rose Caldwell for more than 40 years. He moved slowly with a cane, but his eyes brightened when Ellie explained why they had come. "Daisy May," Henry said, and Mabel lifted her head. Noah noticed first. She heard that. Henry's face softened. "Oh, she was a sweet thing. Rose loved that dog like family. Used to sit with her on that porch every afternoon, weather permitting. Rose would sew little quilt squares, and Daisy May would sleep beside her chair like a yellow rug with opinions." Noah smiled at that, but Ellie felt tears rise behind her eyes. "What happened after Rose passed?" Ellie asked. Henry's expression dimmed. "Her relatives came from out of state. They cleared the house quickly. I asked about Daisy May, but they said they had arrangements. For days before that, though, she lay by Rose's front door. Would not eat much, just watch the road." He paused and looked at Mabel. "I always wondered where she ended up." Ellie placed a hand on Mabel's back. The old dog was sniffing the edge of the porch steps now, slow and careful. She did not suddenly become young. She did not leap in recognition. Life rarely offered such clean theater, but she pressed her nose to the wood and breathed in as if the boards still held a little of what had been lost. Noah stood beside Ellie. His face had changed. The usual guarded look had loosened. "Being left," he said quietly, "does not mean nobody loved you." Ellie looked at him, but he was watching Mabel. "No," she said, "it does not." A few minutes later, Noah stepped away and pulled out his phone. Ellie heard him speaking low near the stone wall. He had called Rachel, his mother. Rachel was 42, tired from work and worry, and Ellie knew how many times she had tried to reach him only to receive short answers or silence. This time, Noah did not sound angry. "Hey, Mom," he said. "No, I'm okay. We're in Vermont." He listened, then looked toward Mabel on the porch. "I just wanted to say I miss you." Ellie turned away, giving him privacy. Some doors should be opened without witnesses standing too close. Before leaving Maple Ridge, Henry gave them directions to the small cemetery where Rose Caldwell was buried. It sat on a hill behind a white chapel with pine trees along one side and snow gathered in soft ridges between the stones. Ellie helped Mabel out of the car, and Noah walked beside them, carrying the old collar carefully in both hands. Rose's grave was near the back, beneath a maple tree. The stone was simple. Rose Caldwell, beloved neighbor and friend. Ellie read the words once, then again. Beloved? Friend. There were worse things to leave behind in the world. Mabel moved slowly toward the grave. Her legs trembled from the cold and the long day, but she did not pull away. When she reached the stone, she lowered her head, sniffed the snow at its base, and then, with a tired sigh, folded herself down beside it. For a moment, no one spoke. Wind moved through the pine trees. Somewhere far off, a church bell marked the hour. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets, tears bright but unfallen. Henry had not come with them, yet his story seemed to stand there too, beside Rose, beside Daisy May, beside every creature who had waited for someone who could not return. Ellie knelt carefully, one hand braced on the cold ground, and placed her palm on Mabel's back. The old dog's breathing was slow and steady beneath her touch. "She loved you," Ellie whispered, "and now I do too." Mabel did not lift her head. She only leaned barely into Ellie's hand. But it was enough. Some answers in life came softly, not because they were small, but because they were sacred. When Ellie, Noah, and Mabel returned to Maine, the little house near the water did not change all at once, but it began to breathe differently. The windows were opened more often, even when the air was cold enough to make Noah complain with great theatrical suffering. The porch light stayed on longer in the evenings. A second mug appeared beside Ellie's on the kitchen table, then a third. The house that had once held its silence like a locked box slowly became a place where footsteps, voices, and the smell of warm bread could enter without asking permission. Clara Bennett, the 73-year-old volunteer from Harbor Haven Animal Rescue, came by one afternoon with a basket of muffins and a file folder full of ideas. She claimed the muffins were only an excuse to check on Mabel, but everyone knew better. Mabel greeted her at the door with a slow tail wag and the proud expression of a dog who had survived the world and now expected visitors to admire her blanket. Clara cried the moment she saw the old Labrador mix standing in the hallway instead of lying in a kennel, and Ellie handed her a napkin before saying, "You are leaking again." Clara laughed through her tears and said at her age, leaking was practically a hobby. Noah began inviting classmates over to work on the senior dog adoption day. Mrs. Angela Parker, his 39-year-old English and civics teacher, had approved the project and helped him turn it into something real. 2 students came first. Lily Harper, a 16-year-old classmate who liked organizing posters and spoke with the calm authority of a young mayor, and Marcus Reed, a 15-year-old student who had laughed at Noah's idea in class but later admitted he had an old beagle at home and wanted to help. At first, Noah acted as if their presence in Ellie's kitchen was a serious inconvenience, but by the second visit he was arguing over poster colors and correcting Marcus on how to spell arthritis. Ellie watched it all from the edge of the room, amazed by the simple noise of young people caring about something. Her table filled with markers, flyers, dog photos, permission forms, and plates of cookies that disappeared faster than any reasonable explanation allowed. Mabel lay under the table like a wise old judge, occasionally lifting her head whenever someone said her name or dropped a crumb. Noah told everyone she was the project supervisor. Lily said Mabel had better leadership skills than half the student council. Mabel accepted the compliment without modesty. The veterans group began visiting too. Frank Dobbins, the 72-year-old retired Navy mechanic who led the local meetings, came by with a loaf of banana bread and a joke so old Ellie suspected it had served in uniform. He brought 2 others with him, Ruth Halpern, a 69-year-old former Army nurse who now volunteered at the town clinic, and Bill Mercer, a 75-year-old retired Marine who spoke slowly but laughed with his whole chest. They sat in Ellie's living room, drank coffee that Frank politely called strong enough to qualify as equipment, and told stories that were sometimes funny, sometimes heavy, and often both at once. One afternoon, Bill looked around at the students, the veterans, Clara at the stove, Noah sorting flyers, and Mabel sleeping on Thomas's blue blanket near the heater. "Ellie," he said, "your house is turning into a rescue shelter." Ellie poured him more coffee. "Only difference is the coffee is worse here." Frank took a sip and made a grave face. "That is accurate." Ellie gave him a look. "Bad coffee is a military tradition. Show some respect." For a moment, the room laughed together. It was not loud, but it was full. Ellie felt the sound move through the house like light entering a room that had been closed for years. The senior dog adoption day arrived on a bright, cold morning at Harbor Haven. Snow lay along the edges of the parking lot, and volunteers had hung handmade signs across the entrance. Silver faces, golden hearts. Clara moved through the shelter with a clipboard, pretending to be calm and failing beautifully. Ellie stood near Mabel, who wore her red scarf and watched the arriving visitors with quiet dignity. Noah stood by the front table with his notes in hand, his face pale in the way brave people sometimes look right before doing the thing that frightens them. Families came. Older couples came. A retired school bus driver came because he had seen a flyer at the grocery store. Some people came out of curiosity and stayed because the dogs were not sad stories once you stood in front of them. They were living souls with gray muzzles, tired eyes, crooked walks, and hearts still willing to try. When it was time for Noah to speak, the room settled. He stepped forward, holding his paper, then folded it and put it in his pocket. Ellie felt her breath catch. She knew that gesture. It meant he had decided not to hide behind prepared words. "My grandmother adopted Mabel when Mabel was days away from being put down," Noah began. "At first, I thought that was a terrible idea. I thought taking in an old dog meant choosing pain on purpose." No one interrupted. Mabel shifted beside Ellie, her leash loose in Ellie's hand. "No one should lie to you," Noah continued. "Senior dogs may need medicine. They may move slowly. They may be scared of things you do not understand. They may have habits from lives you will never fully know. You have to be patient. You have to pay attention. You have to love them in the way they can receive it, not just in the way you want to give it." Ellie looked at Clara and saw tears already gathering. Then Noah's voice softened. "But they will love you like every day with you is the day they got born again." For a few seconds the room was silent. Then someone began clapping, and others joined. Noah looked startled, as if he had expected the floor to open beneath him instead. Ellie smiled at him, and he smiled back, small but real. By the end of the day, 3 senior dogs had adoption applications approved. Hazel, a 12-year-old terrier mix with cloudy eyes, went home with the retired school bus driver. Cooper, a 10-year-old hound with a slow tail and one floppy ear, was adopted by an older couple who said their house was too quiet. Pearl, a gray-faced spaniel who had spent months being overlooked, left with Ruth Halpern, who said she and Pearl could compare joint pain in good company. Clara cried so hard she had to step outside. Ellie followed with tissues. "It is the grass," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "Allergies." Ellie looked at the snow-covered yard. "Clara, there is no grass." "Dust, then." "Outside?" Clara took the tissue. "Do you want me to have dignity or not?" Ellie slipped an arm around her shoulders. "At our age, dignity is optional." They laughed together in the cold, and through the window, Ellie saw Noah kneeling beside Mabel, letting her lick a bit of peanut butter from his finger as if rewarding the general of a successful campaign. Life, after that, did not become perfect, because perfect belonged to greeting cards and people who had not lived long enough. Mabel still moved slowly. Some mornings her joints ached, and Ellie gave her medicine hidden in soft food. Noah still had hard days, but he no longer turned every feeling into a locked door. He kept volunteering at the shelter, first because Clara needed help, then because he did. Ellie kept attending the veterans group, and some days she even spoke. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Every morning, Ellie and Mabel walked by the shore. The old dog's steps were short, and Ellie matched them without impatience. Waves struck the rocks below, folding and breaking with the steady rhythm of something ancient and forgiving. Ellie talked to Mabel about Thomas, about the war, about Rose Caldwell, about the years when she had mistaken survival for living. Mabel listened as dogs listen, without correcting, without rushing, without asking a wounded heart to make itself more convenient. In early December, Ellie and Clara made the program official. They called it Silver Paw's Second Chance, a small effort through Harbor Haven to help senior dogs find homes for their final years. Noah designed the first flyer. Frank brought more banana bread than anyone requested. Ruth sent a picture of Pearl asleep in an armchair with a caption that said, "Queen has claimed the throne." Ellie printed it and put it on the refrigerator. By Christmas Eve, the house near the water was warm with firelight. Noah had fallen asleep on the sofa with one hand hanging toward the floor. Clara sat in Thomas's old chair, drinking tea and pretending not to be moved by the stockings Noah had hung for everyone, including Mabel. Outside the window, snow fell softly, turning the dark yard silver. Mabel lay on Thomas's blue blanket beside the hearth, her red scarf folded near her paws, her gray muzzle peaceful in sleep. Ellie sat beside her and rested one hand lightly on the old dog's back. She thought of the kennel row, the single tail tap, the drive through the rain, the Vermont cemetery, Noah's voice in the shelter, and all the doors inside her that had opened one by one. Love had not erased the pain. It had not brought Thomas back. It had not made war gentle or loss simple. But love had lit a lamp in the room where pain had once sat alone. Mabel's tail moved in her sleep, just once, soft against the blanket. Ellie smiled through tears that no longer felt like shame. The old dog dreamed beside the fire, safe at last, as if she had finally found a place where no one would leave her behind again. In the end, Mabel was not the only one who was rescued. Ellie thought she was saving an old dog from dying alone, but somehow that old dog helped save the parts of Ellie's heart that had been silent for years. Noah thought love was only another way to get hurt, until he saw that being left behind does not mean someone is no longer worthy of being loved. And Mabel, once forgotten at the end of a shelter row, became the quiet bridge that brought a family, a town, and many other senior dogs back into the light. This story reminds us that second chances do not always arrive loudly. Sometimes they come with gray fur, tired eyes, aching paws, and a heart that still knows how to love. It teaches us that old souls, whether human or animal, are not broken things to be thrown away. They are living stories, still waiting for someone kind enough to read the next chapter. Love may not erase every wound. It may not bring back everything we have lost. But love can sit beside us in the dark, stay through the storm, and gently remind us that we are not alone anymore. So, what do you think about Ellie and Mabel's story? Have you ever known a senior dog, a rescue animal, or a person who just needed one more chance to be loved? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words may comfort someone else who needs to hear them today,